This is Peter Merrick, and you are in for a treat. We are again speaking with Dr. Charlene Coon. She has a PhD in cybersecurity. And with all the shenanigans that people are talking about, we are going to do a mental experiment. And our mental experiment is, we're going to imagine that what just happened were not the 2022 elections or even the 2020 elections. We're going back in time to 1920. This was the first election held in the United States after the end of the First World War. In 1919, the world suffered the Spanish flu. 100 million people had died, and they held an election. And in that election, there was a Republican who became president, as Warren Harding. And he, to this day, has won the biggest margin against his rival Democrat, James Cox. Both of them were from Ohio, believe it or not, different parties, but the same state. Both of them were newspapermen. And both of them, their vice president nominees, became president of the United States. When Harding died in 1923, Calvin Coolidge took over and became president. And guess who was the vice president nominee for Cox? FDR Roosevelt. So we are going to spend the next bit imagining we're back in 1920, right after the Spanish flu, right after the end of the First World War. And they had the same technology we have now. And we're going to go and play a game. We're going to imagine if they had that technology, how could history be changed? And today, we would not be talking about President Warren Harding winning. We would be talking about James Cox being the president of the United States. Dr. Coon, Charlene, thank you so much. I love that the fact that you will play this mental game with me today.
It sounded fun. So I'm absolutely excited to just have this conversation, just to go ahead and play this game, to run a scenario that, because 1920 elections and the culture that happened in, and the culture that is happening now are so similar. They had the Spanish flu going on. They had masks going on. They had the racial riots going out in cities all over the place. They had the huge debates between globalism and non-globalism. And those are some of the factors that drove those same elections. They had also, the economy had just plummeted because of the end of World War I. And so we had the economy, the pandemic, the racial tensions, and the globalism discussions going on. So you know, the scenarios between the two, and the difference between one was still doing the paper ballots, and how does that tie in? So,
well, I want to just share with everyone a little about your background, because I feel honored that you're having this discussion with me, that you're humoring me by actually even doing this.
That's because we're such good friends. So
I enjoy this, and this is going to be my favorite up until our next one.
Okay, I agree.
So, Dr. Coon, is one of the premier experts in cybersecurity. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Coon with us. She's just not any cybersecurity expert. She is one of the top in America. She has a PhD in cybersecurity, very rare. She's worked for the FBI. She's also worked and overseen the 2020 US Census. She's worked on some really interesting crimes. I would actually say we're not going to focus on that today. She is an expert. So just to join me and have this conversation, we are really honored. The name of Dr. Coon's company is Pentagon Cyber. And right now, they are helping developing countries not make the same mistakes that we have in the West. She's right now working with Mozambique. That's another discussion because Charlene, we're going to have fun because I'm going to be honest. Why are we talking about 1920 instead of 2020 or 2022? Because in this day and age, to be safe, it's better to talk about historical events than to talk about present events. And I'm just going to let our audience know that. So what we're going to talk about right now, and I'm just going to ask questions because I represent the audience, is we're going to be imagining that the 1920 election had today's technology and how those elections could have turned different, where we would not have Harding as the president, it would have been Cox. And how there could have been stuff that maybe we would have issues with. So Charlene, in 2020, was in charge of cybersecurity for the US Census. This was not just a local, regional census. It was the census for the entire American population. So Charlene, if you can just share with us a little about that position that you had and what you did, and also to share with us some of the things you discovered that, you know, people aren't exactly used to this new technology and how there could be some shenanigans, even though there wasn't under your watch. You've discovered things that could be a problem.
Correct. So for the 2020 census, I was in charge of developing the programs for site security. So that's 18 call centers and the 4 data centers that they worked with. So anything that had to affected security, whether it was people or systems, procedures, environments, facilities, any of those, if it affected data, cybersecurity, then we were involved in that. And I got to build the program from scratch. Now, census data is called Title 13. Some of it becomes Title 26 when it starts involving taxes and stuff. Title 13 has very stringent rules. And those rules are so strict that it says a judge cannot ask for an individual's personal census data, nor can the FBI. You can ask for group stuff that's been scrubbed. So as a group, you can say this group or this this region, or you can ask for that type of stuff, but not for an individual. Voting data is called Title 59. Title 59 data has those same requirements. A judge cannot ask for your personal voting records, nor can the FBI ask for your personal voting record. You would assume that with that being so, that the rules would be very similar. On these census data for the 2020 census, there's no voluntary, it's like you will follow these rules and these are the standards you have to implement on these systems. You know, if you can't for some reason, you have to go through the whole risk acceptance. You have to get authority to operate, which is an ATO. It's a very strenuous, very detailed effort that goes through it. Surprisingly, Title 13 is treated that way. Title 59, it has a voluntary standard, VVSG. That first V stands for voluntary, which means you could say you're in compliance by just saying, I read it and we chose not to do anything. It's voluntary. You're in compliance with it. So there's a huge discrepancy there on how census data is treated, and how and even the US government gave a they reached out to NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The US government said, hey, you know, we're saying that we need to do something better with our voting systems. So they reached out to NIST, who creates lots of standards for lots of industries, and cybersecurity is one of those industries that they definitely pay attention to and help develop standards. So they reached out to NIST, said, NIST, hey, you know, we have the VVSG, could you, you know, take a look at that and see what else we need to do. And so in 2021, I think it was 2021, might have been 2020. I think it's 2021. They did come up with a standard, but it is still in draft form. And when you read that standard still says that it is voluntary. It is voluntary. So you have a voluntary guidelines that are in draft form. You have the VVSG, which is still voluntary, treating Title 59 that way, but not Title 13. And when you start looking at state laws, you see that the state laws, you know, frequently will say, hey, we'll follow the federal, you know, voting system stuff, which at this point is voluntary. And then one of the states enacted early this year an additional piece in their code that says, hey, we will make sure that the systems aren't connected to the internet. We're going to enforce cybersecurity that way. And it's like, okay, if you're going to say you can't be connected to the internet, that's a little piece of connections. I can turn off the internet on my phone, and I can still connect to another system via Bluetooth. That's not internet. It's system to system. It's a point-to-point connection. I still could mess with a system or pull data off. You can do that Bluetooth. You can do that Wi-Fi. Just because you're connected to Wi-Fi, that technology doesn't mean the technology is connected to the internet. So the code for the state more likely should have been more inclusive, to say that we will make sure that the systems are not connected to any unauthorized device or technology.
Yes.
As even on a motherboard, especially with them being voluntary standard for validating the voting systems, it's you don't have to follow all the recommendations. You don't even have to do any of them. You can still say you're in compliance because it's voluntary. You didn't break any rules. On technology, you can embed a chip. You can even embed it under another chip, maybe where it's not so noticeable. They've had instances where, a grain of rice type chip has been installed on motherboards for systems going into the military, and they didn't discover it for years that little grain of rice chip was in there. You can program chips to where they only activate, not during testing days, maybe they just activate on voting day. Maybe they just activate for a few minutes just to get a few bits of data in there or change something. You can put like a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth on there that only activates randomly. You could name that. You know, we all know, most of us know how, you know, when you look on your computer, on your cell phone, you say, hey, what networks do I have around, or devices do I have that I can connect to? You could pull that little connection. You could make it call itself, hey, this is Susie's Fitbit. And then you can write an algorithm that's going to change that later to say, hey, this is John's Fitbit, or turn it off for a half hour and then turn it on again later and say, hey, this is Marcus's iPhone. And that piece is concerning because currently, right now, in some of the states, the only requirement for a poll worker is that they're a registered voter, or if they are a third person, that third person can be 16 or 17 years old, if they're the third person on site. So as a normal voter, they don't have cybersecurity training. They wouldn't know how to check out any of that. What's happening voting day. Is someone bringing something in and connecting via Bluetooth, or did they slip something in, you know, where all the they wouldn't know how to check where the ports really all turned off. Does that system have external ports? Does it have Wi-Fi ports? There's lots of things that could go wrong. And my point with this, you're wondering, where am I going with this? My point with this, to make sure this is all very, very secure, is near impossible. We all try. We all try in industry after industry after industry. We try in technology to make sure that things are very secure. But everyone that knows that learns cybersecurity knows it is a best effort. It's not perfect. So if we have done elections for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years with paper, why don't we just go back to paper?
So I want to just bring us back to the census, because the census is so important for elections.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to identify people, individuals, groups. Also, districts are redistrict based on how many people live there. States lose or win seats. So if we can just focus on that experience of why it's so important, because most people, when they take the census, say it's nice. Oh, there's 329 million people in America right now. The last time they did it was like 315 million. It's more significant than that.
It is. So your census data, if someone was to get into those systems and mess with the data, because you can within milliseconds change, you know, how many seats that state gets for Senate or Congress, or you know, it doesn't take long. So if you can manipulate those numbers, you have already manipulated an election. If you can manipulate seats, because you say you want more power over here, because you know that state or that district, it has more of a political affiliation preference traditionally, you know, try to give them another seat, you know.
You know what it makes me think of? The Pelican Briefs, the movie. The reason I think about that is because there were people who were planning years in advance to make sure something went their way. In that case, it was the Supreme Court. It had to do with an environmental matter. But exactly, starting with the census could be a place where someone could actually do manipulation. And the first census in the United States happened, I believe, in 1790. And it's been used for voting and a number of other things, transfer payments from the feds to the states and different districts. But now let's go back let's take this information, because you shared with us paper ballots have been used forever. That's not exactly true, because democracy for the masses is relatively new. I'm a Canadian.
Okay.
And the more I do my research, I understand that the United States is the most special place in the world. And it's hard for me to say this because I'm not American. It is the most special because it's the first country in the world revolution that threw off oligarchy, and it also threw off empire. And it actually said the individual is where the country starts, and the government is to serve the governed. Doesn't work that way in Britain. Doesn't work that way in Canada. If you really read what's being said, we serve the Queen, and now he's not my king. But that's besides the point. So this is something, having your franchise, the ability to vote, is the most sacred thing you can have in a republic, which the United States is, by laws, with representation of people who are elected. That's where the democracy is, but it's not mob rule. There's laws, and you just pointed out that there was Title 13, which governs the census, and there was Title 59 that governs the elections. Title 13, if I got it right, you'll score me right now on what mark I get, Charlene. It's not optional. This is the rules. This is the law. However, with individual franchise, the vote, it's for Title 59. It's optional whether they apply it or not for cybersecurity.
It's optional.
So let's go back 100 years. And I just want to go and paint a picture.
Okay.
The doughboys have just gotten back to America. There's been a worldwide pandemic called the Spanish flu. 100 million people died of the Spanish flu. If you look at pictures in 1920, you're going to see people all masked up.
Yep.
There was an election that was held, and it was a very special election for two reasons. It was the first election post-World War I. The American people were making the decision whether they were going to join the League of Nations, which became the UN, which became a globalist organization. Basically, the Americans would be going under the thumb of the British because those were the people who wanted the League of Nations. Or they would remain a sovereign country. Number two on the ballot, not on the ballot, but when it happened, is the 19th Amendment. Half our population were given the franchise. That was the first election in America that all women who were of age voted.
Absolutely. Yep.
And the United States fulfilled a huge promise at that point, because it didn't matter what color you were, it didn't matter what sex you were, you had the most precious thing of an American, and that was a franchise to be able to cast your vote. And back then, Charlene, even though there was this pandemic and people were frightened, they showed up to the polls, they filled out a piece of paper, they dropped it in the box, and there were individuals who counted, and there were people who watched them who were counted, and then they had the phone, they would call into the counties, and the counties would call into the states, and in one day we would know who was president of the United States. Now, if we could go back in time with the technology that exists now for that election, let's talk about how it could have been manipulated. How Warren Harding could have lost to Cox. And just let me put that in perspective. Warren Harding was a Republican. He won. He won 37 states, and Cox only won 11. He received 16 million votes, because the United States was a lot smaller then, to 9 million votes to Cox. And this was a legitimate election. We just got out of a global pandemic, out of a war. Yes, there were race riots. Yes, there was a deep recession. However, there was a real election and people showed up at the polls. So Charlene, let's imagine we've taken the technology that you have safeguarded your career, and we bring it back to 1920, and let's imagine that Cox's people and the powers that be who don't want Harding to win want to manipulate the vote.
Okay. So,
if you were the devil, how would you do it?
oh my goodness. So
you're on the spot.
To let you know, to do that is not that hard.
No.
No, it's
they
not.
Tell me it's difficult. I hear it's difficult on the mainstream media all the time. It's impossible.
Let me give you an example. So when you hear about cybersecurity breaches, you will hear, oh my gosh, that was such a sophisticated, team that did that, and oh my goodness, and news will go on about it. And of course, the company that got hacked will go, absolutely, that was sophisticated. But if you take away all that fluff, all those fluffy words, and you actually drill down to the sentences that say what actually happened, it was human error. Human didn't do something. Human, they may have got warnings on a website that said, hey, the certificate, that encrypts your data on your website, that's about ready to expire. And I can't tell you how many companies ignore that. I've worked for a few of them. We've repeatedly tried to tell them, hey, that's going to expire. You might want to, update that. And then it won't work, and they'll go, oh my goodness, oh, I guess we really should do that. Another human error. You have an intern. Read one of the other news articles. It was an intern that hard-coded the username and password into the code. That means if the code is being read, the username's there, the in plain text, the password's there in plain text. Oh, and then the intern took it and put it up on a public repository where you store code. So human messed up to make sure intern didn't have access to that repository. Human messed up, not knowing not to hard code stuff. Another human messed up, didn't check their code to make sure they didn't do that, didn't give them the simple basic 101 training. You can go incident after incident after incident. And when you read through all the hoopla of oh, that's sophisticated. No, it's not. It is human error. Simple, little basic 101, the log4j that was in Java that affected systems globally. Java is used everywhere. That was one line of code that if somebody had taken the time and effort to do what is called a static code analysis on that code, they might just could have caught that. In fact, those tools are very automated. If companies took the time to make sure they had somebody that knew how to build the profiles and then run it, those folks can tell you, oh, hey, this line of code right here, you might want to fix that. And Clockwork's one of my favorite tools to use. Tell you right here, there's the code. You click on the little question mark that have in the little corner that a lot of people ignore. You click on that, it gives you pages and pages of, hey, this is how to fix that. Or these are some suggestions on how to fix that. But
too frequently when I've been working for companies, they will say, we're not going to check any of the old stuff. Nobody's hacked it yet. We're just going to ignore the old code. We're just checking new code. And that's how Log4j got on so many systems. Do you want to know your voting systems? Your voting systems, a lot of the technology and stuff that interact in that, they are not just, you're not just checking the operating system. Many systems have what's called embedded operating system, which is like a little minuscule type operating system. I've worked for a lot of companies, supposedly very smart, very intelligent, handling all types of like super, hush hush technology that we're like, yeah, no, we don't harden that. That's embedded code. And I'm like, can I please show you how to harden that? Yes, we'll have to talk to the manufacturer. We'll have to work with them to make sure we don't, mess with sensitivities, but it is the human equation in this. So when you're working on those embedded systems, lots of people assume you can't harden them, that you can't do cybersecurity on them. You absolutely can. You just have to work with a vendor. You have to be aware that they can be hardened. Then you work with the vendor to test the sensitivity of the device. How does it function before you harden it, and how does it function afterwards? And you just make sure it's having the same performance. But little companies to big organizations, I get constantly, you run into people that don't know or don't care, or are paid to do something that they shouldn't do. Having worked for the FBI, I was disappointed time and time again by finding out that it was, as we're digging for digital evidence and stuff, finding out that it was someone's business partner, that it was their secretary, that it was, their spouse, it's their religious leader. It was, it just, human beings do horrible things for various different reasons. And as long as you have this human in the equation, you want to make the census, the voting, you want to make those as, when you're talking about split seconds of time, digital, you can change something in split seconds of time, massively, for hundreds of, thousands of counts for census or counts for votes. So if you can manipulate that, and not just, someone purposely doing it, someone can make a mistake and push something and it will read something wrong. You can have technical difficulties. So in my personal opinion, for technical solutions, when it comes to such important matters, we've done it for, like I said, at least here in the US, for hundreds of years, by human, that it takes us as a human a long time, if we're counting, or to be able to affect hundreds of thousands of counts of who lives there, or who voted for what. So, and cybersecurity is super expensive. It just is. We're expensive people. The technology behind it is super expensive.
It's centralized. So somebody, if they were nefarious, they could play with things. I just want to share from my own personal experience.
Okay.
I don't have the franchise in America, even though I have a beautiful background where I don't know where it is. But the last one was Toronto.
Peter. I did see that snow. Are you trying to hide the location where you are now by changing to the beach?
No, I'm fascinated with technology, and I'm just learning that I have backgrounds, and this is actually pretty neat. But Charlene, I just want to share this with you. So the country I come from, one of the things they like bragging about is they use paper ballots. We don't use those machines that you just press and you go like that, and they got slot machine that were made in the 1950s. No, we use paper X. Well, I used to take my kids all the time because I wanted to show them that I was exercising my franchise. Well, as soon as I gave my ballot to the person who was collecting them, they put it in a Dominion machine that scanned it.
Are you
And
kidding?
so it's like when I think about it, oh wow,
Oh
paper,
my-
paper, paper. But the counting wasn't happening with the paper. It was happening with this thing that sort of looked like one of those ancient scanners, you know, like when you would put paper through, it would just scan it onto your computer. That's exactly what it did. And at that point, I don't know. I don't understand. Like maybe there's a program that basically says what we don't like from this precinct or that precinct. And going back to imagining we're in 1920 and it's between Harding and Cox. And let's say there were some nefarious people who wanted America to join in on the League of Nations because Harding didn't do it. He wanted to go back to the way things were, where the United States was not pulled into a global war between empires, because think about it, the history of America, it was actually a rebellion, a revolution against a empire, because that's what the League of Nations was, to go back to being a sovereign, Republican, democratic nation. Let's imagine somebody had machines and they knew that if Cox won, the United States would be rejoining the British Empire.
Ouch. Yeah.
It's the truth. It's the truth. I'm calling what it is. Cecil Rhodes. Every American politician who has a Rhodes Scholar is basically bowing down to King Charles today, because it's at Oxford, and I don't have to say more. Just go and study who these politicians are.
I think watching how it would be wonderful if we could just treat each other like human beings and respect each other's opinions, and not feel that we had to manipulate elections or manipulate census counts to force other people to believe how we ourselves do. I strongly feel that we are all entitled to our own opinions, and when we that we should respect other people, and not like, oh my gosh, they believe different than me, so ooh, you know, taboo. No, the world didn't used to be like that, at least for a few years. As we were growing up, you respected other people's opinions. I think part of the downfall, you know, back in the 1920s, you were allowed to talk about politics. You were allowed to talk about religion. I think that is one of the things that kept the nation strong, because in the 1920s, you could do that. My recent trip back to Mozambique, you know, I spent the last 2.5 months there. And it was so refreshing to, it was like going back in time, not quite back to the, you know, 1920s, but, you know, maybe more back to like the 1960s in the US. And, you know, people absolutely respected each other's conversations. They respected other people's opinions. They treated them as human beings should treat each other. I've told countless people that Mozambique is known for their gems and their gold and their oil, and I said no. I said Mozambique's real gems are their people, because they still respect each other, even with their diverse opinions. That they respect each other. They treat each other cordially. Being socially graceful and in the way you treat people is very much expected there. It was an absolute pleasure to experience that, and not all the drama that we're pulling out. And you know,
Charlene, you mentioned something that made me recall something I just read. You said when you went to Mozambique, you felt that you were back in like the 1960s, meaning that it was a civil society where if you had different opinions, people respect you and you were still part of a larger community. I just read that in 1960, before the shooting of JFK and also before the Vietnam War, 73% of the American population believed that in government, that the government was good. Fast forward to today, only 13%.
ooh, I have not seen that statistics, but
I
I'm
just
not
read it.
surprised by it, really. I'm not surprised.
It just makes sense that the fact that now, again, one of the things that make this country special is, again, I'm Canadian. Freedom of speech. Think about what that means. I also have the ability to voice my opinion and not fear that I'm going to be silenced, I'm going to be disenfranchised, I'm going to be jailed, and I'm going to be shot. That I'm allowed to have that. And that is why the vote is so important. So if I were like a nefarious person and I wanted to manipulate that 1920, and I want to emphasize we're not talking about any other election, you can make the association yourself, 1920, between Warren Harding and James Cox. So Harding is a Republican. He won 37 states out of the 48 states because we yet were to admit Alaska and Hawaii.
Yep.
And Cox only won 11. With today's technology brought back to 1920 with the Spanish flu, people wearing masks, and they brought in mail-in ballots and they did whatever. How could they, with the technology, manipulate it so we would be thinking instead of Harding winning 37 states, he only won 23.
Easy
And
way.
on the other side, Cox ends up walking away with 25 and he becomes president.
So easiest way to accomplish that when you're dealing with technology is hire incompetent people to manage the technology. You hire many incompetent people that aren't certified correctly, that don't have the proper training, don't have the proper experience, or your laws or code don't require proper people to be there with the proper training, with the proper certifications. You mess with your laws, you mess with your code, you mess with your standards, make them voluntary. And then you make sure there's a few key people in certain places that because you have incompetent people, incompetent regulations, code, laws, that they're less likely to be caught.
I have a question to ask. So if we had the technology we have today and have the incompetence that we have today, and we were to go back to 1920 with your expertise, your experience, how many key people in the know would be needed to change the fate of history and make James Cox the president, getting back to this, joining the League of Nations, maybe even joining Mussolini and Hitler, because a big portion of the people who supported Cox were pro-fascist and anti-communist.
Yep.
How many people in the know could manipulate it with today's technology back then?
I'd say you could do it with
people. Am I counting properly? 3 people Three.
Three.
And when you were in the census, how many people did you count in America?
330 million people.
3 people.
3.
Charlene, those 3 people, who would you need and what roles would they play?
Okay, so one would be an auditor who's supposed to be auditing, monitoring that to make sure that things are how they're supposed to be. Someone with those type of permissions so that they could say, oh no, everything does look right, all the configurations are right, you know, it's secure, but when in reality it's not. Then you would need the person that has written the code to manipulate that information and to be able to run that. And then you would need the person that has the power to place those people in the key spots at the locations for employment. Would be, you know, not that hard to do. So it's, you know, it doesn't take a lot when the world is, when the systems are so connected. You know, they don't have to be connected to the internet. They just have to be on a network. And we know they're on a network because we watch the data live update. They're on a network.
Wow.
Yeah. Because all the census data in any type of census voting, these type of activities going on, it is all, we watch it live. It's all obviously connected. They may say it's not connected to the internet, but being connected to a network is different than being connected to the internet. So it's obviously connected to a network, which is systems interconnected with each other that can communicate with each other in a group. There doesn't have to be any internet connection, but they can all communicate with each other globally, nationally, or within a corporation, across state lines, or, you know, a network. And so if they're all connected, and if you have godlike privileges on those systems, then you could do very bad things. I have had godlike permissions on international systems of high importance. Luckily, I chose to be honest. But godlike permissions exist on systems where you give someone those you know, godlike permissions on the whole network, or on a key component in that network. Bad things can happen. It is your still dealing with humans.
Charlene, I just want to state this for everyone to hear, because I'm a little shocked. So I'm not going to talk about today. We are doing this mental exercise to be safe, that it's 1920.
Mm-hmm.
If we were able to, if we had the same technology that we have now, that didn't require paper counting, but it was all electronic on private networks for those 48 states, for the 25 million people who voted in that election for the presidential election, you would only need 3 people to change the course of history. Is that what you just said to me? 3 people? 3 nefarious people?
3 nefarious people.
And they don't even have to be in America. You just have to go and make sure that everybody who's actually working is extremely uneducated and incompetent. And these people here can actually change the fate of the world.
Yes. And assuming that people are making the correct choices in very prominent systems that have high impact on the world. No, go check out some whistleblowing activities. Go check out what those whistleblowing activities say. You will find that there's people, there are good people stepping up and saying,
Yes.
hey, something stinks. Could you please check this out?
Charlene, the last time we spoke, you shared with me, or maybe it was the first time we spoke, and I believe this is very important, that when you began working for the FBI, there was a gentleman who made everyone cry, who did the polygraphs to see if
Yep.
you were an ethical person or not. And he really pushed you, and they were able to know whether you were ethical or whether you were not, because they were able to tell. And I remember you sharing that story.
Guys admitted they cried. I was like,
Well,
woo, just me.
I cried when the truckers rolled into Ottawa. Real men can cry. It's legitimate. Yeah. So
That was a beautiful sight, by the way.
it was probably the best. Now, so the reason I bring that up, Charlene, because as you're sharing with me about there's whistleblowers and there's good people working within these federal institutions, the people that get appointed to run it, they don't have to go through that polygraph.
I don't know at what levels they have to. That is a piece I don't know. I would hope that they would, but
See, that's the problem. Everybody hopes that the other person's doing their job.
Absolutely. And so we've identified a lack in my knowledge. So now I need for my own, I'm curious, do the leaders, when they are appointed to these government positions over these organizations where people normal for their jobs have to have a polygraph, do the appointees of those top level pieces, do they have to do the polygraph too? I'm gonna have to Google it and find it out.
I know for a fact that senators, congressmen, and even the president don't.
Correct.
What's good for thee is not good for ye. That's literally what's happened. And this might be the reason why in 1960, 73% of the American population believed in government and their leaders. And in 2022, only 13%. Charlene, you know what I take from this? That's a real shocker that I want everyone to think about. If we had the technology we have right now in the Harding-Cox election of 1920, over 100 years ago, you would only need 3 well-placed people to change the fate of human history. And the rest of the population wouldn't know it had happened.
Yeah, we can hope that they have broken down responsibilities less than that. You could put protections in place to where nobody.
So 30 people, 30
Yep.
people with
Right.
Swiss bank accounts.
Yep. Yeah, you could put protections in place, assuming no one had godlike privileges over the whole network. But I'm just saying my experience in working in very, very locked down systems, that is not what I have experienced. I have experienced being given godlike permissions to systems globally that I could have chosen to cause havoc, and I chose not to.
Charlene, before we leave this topic, I now want both our audience and you to imagine you're back in 1920, the election's over, and you have a message you want to give to future generations in 2020, 2022, and 2024 with your expertise. What message would you want to put in a bottle that would be read in the town square regarding elections and security?
I would say, please go back to paper.
Paper.
Please go back to paper.
Why?
It is harder to mass produce the number of votes needed to swing an election. Yes, you can still cheat in, with paper ballots, but I would say paper ballots not being read by digital systems like you experienced, and requiring voter ID. Why not? We have to have an ID to drive. We have to have an ID for so many different things. What's the problem? If you think that some populations, that it's hard for them to get a voter ID or a driver's license, some type of ID, if you think it's hard for them to get some type of ID, then how about you concentrate on that, on solving that problem? Concentrate.
It's an insult to people's intelligence saying they cannot get ID. It is an absolute insult. And I have to share with you, if I was one of those target groups that they were saying that we just happen to be stupid and we have no access to that ID, I would turn around to the people who were actually telling me that and say, you're a racist. It's a right to exercise your legal franchise, and it is the responsibility of a citizen, it is the obligation of a citizen to also perform rules of a citizen. And that means getting an ID, right, doing and something.
For those that aren't citizens, then I would say, please become a citizen. If you want to vote, why don't you become a citizen? Okay, it's just that simple.
If you are going to live in a place, you should want to have your voice heard. Charlene, I just want to, just before we say goodbye, until we come with our next conversation, I want to thank you, and this is what I've taken. It doesn't take many people to destroy a good thing. To keep a good thing, you need citizens who are going to watchdog, demand that our franchise is protected. And that means you have to get up off your butt and get active. Just like the millions of people in 1920 who showed up in person while there was a world pandemic, because making that vote count mattered. And I want to share something else with you, not you, Charlene, but to our viewers. The vote went up 50% that election. Why? Because women had the franchise to vote as well. That means there were twice as many people in the 1920 election who showed up personally, checked off their ballots, and made a difference for you and I today. Charlene, you've been wonderful, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation, and I'm going to go and no longer use my computer. I'm going out and getting a pad of paper and a pen. I can't read my writing anymore, but I'm going to learn how to write now. Charlene, you've been awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hey, absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, Peter.
We'll be back. And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And I find this all the time. I sit down with business owners all the time, and they always give me unsolicited advice because they want to share their knowledge, and it's really important.
Here with me is Peter Merritt. Merrick, president of MerrickWealth.com.
Peter is an income and capital enhancement consultant,
speaker, and author.
He is also a
recognized expert in the world of succession planning.
There's over 800 published articles and 3 industry textbooks.
He's a Canadian who joins us today from San Diego, California. Thanks for joining us.
So, Peter Merrick, tell us about you.
Well, I've been in the financial service industry since the end of 1991. I graduated during the recession. The baby boomers were in their positions, so there was no jobs. So the two businesses that opened up were the technology field and the financial field. It was the Wild West in both of them. So I had this brilliant idea, and I had a friend of mine, and we started talking, and I said, hey, how difficult would it be for us to get a mutual fund dealer license? Not difficult enough. Thank God for those 10 years, the market just went up. I would sit down and I would take somebody's entire life savings that they spent 15, 20 years accumulating it, this young kid who knew nothing about nothing, and I would go and just invest it, and luckily it went up because the markets were crazy in the 90s. It was a boom time. But in 2004, my life blew up. I almost went bankrupt, but I was very fortunate because there were very few CFPs at the time, but every university in Canada wanted to offer the CFP program. So I got recruited as a prof. And it was great. I was reading all the textbooks. I would call all the big publishers. And what I came to the conclusion was the succession planning was missing. One of the issues is there was very little talking beyond the accumulation stage. Like, how do you have a healthy life after you've done that? I also looked at demographics. At the turn of the 20th century, the average life expectancy in the West and North America was 43 years old. And people are dying at 83. No one ever lived to 83.
Well, so I always say that there's two financial plans. There's the financial one that we work on, and there's what you get to do with all your time and that energy once you're done. And with this thing that they've been racing towards, they've hit it. But if they haven't thought about what they're going to do after or how they're going to feel validation for their existence, they just never stop. They just keep going.
Well, it's not anybody's fault because when people are young, they focus too much on doing. And later on in life, they have to focus on being. So I wrote my own textbooks because I thought it was very important to talk about how do you transition from the first half of life, which Carl Jung called it the mourning, where you're accumulating, whether it's your ego, designations, education, houses. The second half is deconstruction, giving wisdom away, giving away my money, giving away my time, leaving a legacy.
So talk to me about that stage. What's the purposeful way or kind of the best practices, ways, or considerations for people to take when transitioning into that stage of life?
Well, one, decide whether or not you want an exit. I find between the ages of 55 and 70, a lot of people feel that I'm just tired doing the same thing that I've always done, and I have the money now. So maybe I should get out when the going is good and pass on my business to someone who's got the energy to navigate it. Number two, who are you going to sell your business to? There's one issue about selling it to a family member or an employee. What happens after you sell it? Things don't go right. A lot of business owners want to sell their business because they just want to wash their hands. But by selling it to someone you know, you're not getting out of your business. The best is to sell to a third-party purchaser. The last one is after they make that transition from being a business owner, building a nest egg for themselves to have choice, they don't know what they're going to do. I've spoken to people who say, I'm going to take up golf. So my question is, do you golf now? I don't golf now. So what makes you think you're going to golf later? I just want to share with you guys a story. There was a gentleman, his name was Bob Hunter. He was quite a celebrity. He started Greenpeace during the height of my blow up when I was going through business loss. He was bringing me on national television. And you know what he was doing? He was saying, so Peter, don't you do that? And then he would give my phone number and he would give my web address. The reason why it went by MerrickWealth.com, because it was almost like a
phone number that would run across the television, and I could actually see myself making money off of it. And he was dying. He had prostate cancer. And he turned to me and said, Peter, one day you will be in a position that you'll help someone else. And let me share with you about the legacy. Bob's been dead for 16 years. And I'm sharing you the legacy of Bob Hunter because he made a difference for me. And if I make a difference in anyone else's life, I'm a product of those people who are willing to do things and they had no expectations. And a true mentor is someone who has no expectations that they're going to see the tree blossom.
The reason I wrote The King of Main Street is younger people don't know how to find the right mentors, and older people have this need to mentor. It's almost like a biological need because they can see beyond their physical existence. They know that the sun was here before them and it will be after them, and what's going to be left behind that they leave.
I would joke, I can't make you money, but I can definitely save you money. What I mean by that is I am a Sherpa. That's someone who would guide someone to help them come down. But I realize the most precious asset they have is not their money. It's their time.
What last piece of advice would you like to give our listeners?
If you have a business, the most important thing to ask yourself is, why did you get into the business? And it's usually not to create a legacy, it's to create the lifestyle that you want. And at that point, ask yourself, what do you want to do during your last days? The last human freedom is to choose one's own beliefs, one's own way. Everything else you can have taken away from you. But what you believe and how you choose to act in the world, that is yours. And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And that is going to give you fulfillment emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.